And now, please welcome CEO of IMEX Group, Carina Bauer, Senior Vice President of Strategy for Freeman, Ken Holsinger, and President and CEO of PCMA and CEMA, Sherrif Karamat, in discussion with Skift Meetings Editor-in-Chief, Miguel Neves.
All right, thank you for welcoming us. Looking forward to a conversation. I've been asked to set up with some data, the conversation we're going to have about generations, and so we'll kick right into a fast-paced data presentation on some of the most recent research that we've done. So as we talk about where we're going, I want to share with you some information. We do a report several times a year. Some of you may have seen it, called the Freeman Trends Report, and this particular study that I'm going to share is an amalgamation of both attendee and exhibitor research. I'm actually going to be releasing at IMEX another chapter of that research that will kind of sum up with meeting planners and marketers kind of their perspective. But as we dive into this, I want to kind of set the backdrop of where we're at, and if we can go to the next slide, the conversation that we're having, I'm advancing, and it's advancing, there we go, okay, is this fast evolution that we're going through. And so as we move through this information today, we're going to be talking about the various generations. We wanted to define these generations. There's a conversation about the fact that we have 4 solid groups in the workforce right now. I think it's interesting as you look at this, the different perspectives of these generations when we talk about different activities with networking and speaking and various things. Each of these has a different perspective on that. For instance, if I talk about networking with Gen Z, that's a career insurance conversation versus a legacy conversation that we see with boomers. So as we move into the information here, we will walk through kind of the backdrop of where we've been. I've been having this conversation for the past few years post-pandemic, and I worked with the Department of Labor to look at where will the workforce be in 5 years. Well, we are there. We're on the cusp of that. And so we want to kind of update the conversation around the research, and as we go through that, you'll actually find that last month, you'll see that this almost crossed over, but last month it did. Gen Z actually overtook boomers in the workforce. It's happening rapidly, and we need to be paying attention. But what we wanted to do is step back a little bit and actually look at the information for where the workforce is going to be over the next 5 years. And so as we look at that information, I think it sets up our conversation today. It rapidly is shifting because this is not just another generational transformation. Normally we would have handed from boomers to Gen X. They would have been the next in line. But because Gen X, any Gen Xers in the house, I'm a Gen Xer, we have never mattered. We don't matter. We are the smallest generation. No one ever talks about us. You won't see a study on Gen X. And as you can see, we will be quickly passed over. The story here is that within the next 5 years, we're going to see a generational shift that is really not a next-gen conversation, but really moving to what we would consider to be now-gen. This group is evolving very quickly, it's moving very fast, and as we look at kind of a snapshot of who they are, there is a QR code for a deeper study here on the generations. The thing that I want to call attention to is how rapid this is happening. We saw it used to take 5 to 10 years to shift demographics in the meetings market because boomers were such a large contingency. In this particular case, we saw in less than 18 months a shift from 51 down to 42 as to the average age of the attendee. The interesting thing is the exhibitor, when we studied them with a large sample, we saw a similar shift. We are not yet seeing that shift among meeting planners, and I'll leave you to your conclusions as we talk today about what that might mean, but we are not retiring. We must just love our jobs. We are hanging out. We are almost 9 years older than the average attendee or participant in the ecosystem. So kind of as we dig into this conversation, I want to kind of build a little bit into what this means then for their values. And so I'm going to pull up a slide that's really dense. This is the slide you should never show. We're going to send this out to you because there's a lot of density here. We're not going to spend a lot of time going into this. At a glance, what I want you to see here is that this is not just a generational shift. This is a complete shift in the way that priorities are outlined in workforce, and therefore, as we look to plan for the next generation or this now generation of new attendees, we need to look differently. And often it's looked at as good versus bad. I talk to boomers and Xers, and they'll say, well, why don't they value work flexibility, or why don't they consider wealth building or career building to be important? That's not the issue here. We're seeing a cataclysmic shift in the way that they build priorities. I think you can see that Gen X becomes a bit of a bridge in this heat map, but the biggest shift that I would point to is really around the digital native. They have come into a different world than we grew up in. That shift, we hear a lot of conversations about that, is affecting many, many things, and not the least of which is what we see in meetings. But I think paying attention to these values and these value shifts will be a conversation that will keep us going for quite some time in the industry. And so as we move into this, what does that mean? Well, they have different perspectives about a lot of the things. Without going into each of these and reading them off to you, what you can understand is that effectively this opposites value proposition is exemplified here, that in things like companies aligning with my values. If we look at the next generation, it's a flip with boomers. Less than 17%, about 15% of boomers say that they want companies to align, and that opposites game plays across a lot of these conversations, which is a tricky area to navigate through. So as we move into this, though, well, what does that mean for meetings? Are they pulling back from meetings? I've been asked to go on a number of different stages to say, will the next generation come to meetings? Will they? Will this remote workforce trend leave them in their spaces? And the answer is actually unequivocally no. That actually, the more time that the next generation is spending on screens, the more they want to be in person. The more they understand what's happening with AI and the possibilities that it brings, as well as the dangers that it can also bring with misinformation, et cetera, the more they want to be in person. And so we can see that this large cohort of next-gen consumers, we did a lengthy study on do they trust what they see? They say yes. It increases as they spend time with brands in person. And in fact, when we came back to that cohort a year later, they were still at 68%, which is, if you're a marketer, that's unheard of to see that kind of follow through. So our space is important. We've validated this with a number of reports, like with Edelman's Trust Barometer. In-person events are the #1 most trusted space. And the more we deal with screen time, the more we deal with AI and the challenges and opportunities that it brings, the more the next generation actually trusts and wants physical hands-on touch in person at events. A little bit about this generation, just as a snapshot, I'll call out a couple of things here. When we talk about influencers in this space, they've asked in our focus groups to really shift. They're not talking about the Kardashians. They're talking about Joe the plumber at a plumbing association that is a person in their space that is extremely important. We did a study with a large baking association, and that conversation was also around the influencers, the micro-influencers in their space. And I think as marketers, you understand this. We're going to be talking a little bit about what they do with job hopping. It's interesting because when I talk to audiences, particularly of boomers, they'll talk about this as one of the biggest negatives. Look how much they're moving around. They're disloyal. Let me clue you in. Loyalty means something different to my generation and the generation above me than it does to that generation. When we talk to my generation, loyalty is about being loyal to a brand or to a company that I'm spending my career with. To this next generation, it's about, is that brand, is that company, is that product, are they being loyal to me in the way that they treat me as an employee, et cetera. And I think we've seen a lot of bad acting across the spectrum over the past few years that will drive that generation. It's driving their job hopping as we dig into that. So what does this mean for us? We see this coming out that this generation is more stressed out and they have trust issues with brands because they make promises that they don't live through with. So this conversation, as we look at the broad aspect of the workforce, is something we want to have and pull into a conversation together as meeting planners and bring relevance to this space. But I think it's a backdrop for that conversation.
Thank you, Ken. Fascinating, always. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. One question to kind of bring us into the conversation. You mentioned quite a few kind of consumer research stats in there. How much of that is really relevant to us? Because I always feel like we're talking more about the business side of the world. You know, do I want to be friends with my colleagues on Facebook or Instagram? That's different to the influencers that are in the kind of private life. How much of that is really translatable into what we're talking about?
We've seen an evolution of, or a breaking down of the gap between our business persona and our consumer persona really over the past 20 years. And that really came to its completion during the pandemic as we sat at home and we were the ultimate both consumer and business employee at the same time. And I think that perspective, it's really good for us as marketers because there's a much broader set of research we can look for, but brings different challenges as well. But I believe that they've bridged together, we think first through our consumer hat and very little of separation between consumer and business persona.
Fascinating. Another impact of the pandemic. Now, Carina, CEO of IMEX, Sherrif, CEO of PCMA and CEMA, thank you for being with us. I wanted to kind of split this conversation into the HR side and the events that we're planning. And I'm going to start with events particularly. And I'll start with you, Carina. We have a picture of the IMEX run, one of the kind of activities around IMEX, which is always fun. What's working at your events? When you're kind of planning for this next or now generation, what is actually working for you?
Yeah, so obviously I'm assuming most people in the room know or have experienced an IMEX show, and obviously it's a large show. We're bringing the whole industry together. People kind of call it the Super Bowl. I think what is working increasingly well over the past few years, and as we look forward and looking at what, I don't know whether it's just next generation or whether it's just a shift in what all of us want from events. But as Seth was talking about, we want to connect with the right people. So I think one of the things that works well for us is that we've kind of got a mega event where we can bring everybody together. You know that everyone is there, the senior people are there, your peers are there, but then creating micro events and micro opportunities for people to really connect with a small group of people so that you get that opportunity for the best of both worlds, if you like. And one of the ways we do that is by letting go a little bit. So, we don't try to control all of it, and that allows everybody within the industry to come and create their own part of the IMEX experience.
Can you give us an example of a micro experience that comes to mind?
Yeah, well, actually, all the events that exhibitors do, you might be surprised I'm not invited to most of them. If you're a planner, you'll be invited to a lot more than me. But, there are literally hundreds of these events that take place for buyers to connect with certain exhibitors. Or, for example, PCMA will come and they will have their own event for the CEMA community, and they'll have their own event for a specific part of the PCMA community. Or, obviously, MPI, their strategic partner, and they're doing the same thing. There's CMP breakfast, so you might have 20 people, 30 people. Yep. So that's really what I'm talking about. So bringing in every different sort of association, Skift Innovation Lab, this is all an opportunity for people to meet and connect with like-minded individuals.
Break down the barriers.
And break down those barriers, yeah.
Sherrif, you, PCMA and CEMA, do you have things that are working particularly well at your events?
So, good day, everybody. I do think immersive experiences are really important. So if you're in the medical community, you want to meet with medical event organizers that are of like mind and hearing from them. I think that the shift that we are seeing is that they don't want to see people like us talking to you. They actually want to be involved in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so I think that immersive experience is really working. I do think that the integration of technology is also working. It's an enhancement to engagement, and it allows people that are not attending the physical event to be brought into the event. So, and especially the millennials and Gen Z, they really enjoy that part of bringing in their friends that are outside of the conference or the physical conference into the conference. So having that dual kind of relationship while they're, I think those things are working. There's lots of others, but I overall, I think that immersive or that sort of cross-exchange through digital is really helping.
Now, there's a festival in the UK that I think you're familiar with, Carina, the Wreckfest, which is essentially a kind of a music festival, but without music act on stage. It's a recruiting, it's an HR event, conference, but it happens in a field over a couple of days, and sometimes it rains and sometimes it doesn't. It usually rains in England, by the way.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where we're heading? Is IMEX going to be in a field one day where everybody's kind of out partying and just experiences it? I mean, we're speaking with Ben Irwin from Encore later. They have a big presence at IMEX, but it's not really a regular booth. It's an experience.
Yeah.
Is that where you think it's heading?
I think for some companies who can take that step, as Sherrif said, that ability to create an immersive experience within a business event. IMEX isn't going to be in a field, I'm afraid. Maybe we do like an IMEX extra at some point, but no. So IMEX isn't going to be. But what Encore have done, I think, is super clever because they've taken the traditional trade show booth and instead of talking about their products, which would have looked like all the other production companies out there, they've actually leaned into their values, they've leaned into their culture, and they've leaned into what's important to the industry and trying to drive forward certain industry trends and create an immersive experience so that you don't go into that booth and talk about Encore, you talk about, impact or DEI or sustainability, and you have an experience. And then if you're interested, you might talk about Encore. And I think, I hope that that's been successful for them. For us, it's great because it adds another experience to the show that people really enjoy as well. So that's been an interesting partnership.
Okay. I want to get a show of hands in the audience. Who has changed, adapted their events based on kind of trying to attract the next gen or the now generation? Who's been actively thinking about that and actually made changes? Okay, good, 30-40% of the audience. Thank you. Question for you, Sherrif. What about PCMA in terms of the membership side of things? Is that something that this generation that we're talking about, are they looking for? Are they actively buying PCMA memberships? Or are you having to look at it in a more broader way?
Well, the next gen and Gen Z and millennials are becoming a bigger part of the audience for sure. Our membership, I think now is about at least 30%. They're not, disclosing your age is voluntary. So the ones that we know of, there's about 30% of our membership who has switched. It used to be a lot lower, obviously. It was like 10%. So that's a big switch. But it's also showing up in our attendance. PCMA gets at least 65 to 70% of its members coming to convening leaders and EduCon. And if you've seen pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, you're seeing that switch happening. So definitely, we are certainly reaching out much more. We're being much more intentional. But I do think that, and I think Ken touched on it, is that the millennials and Gen Zs want to meet, but they just want to meet differently. They do not want to meet the way we want to meet. And so I do want to pick up on Carina's, whether we're going to meet in the field. I don't know that...
You're okay with that? You're okay with PCMA?
Yeah, I'm okay with that, actually. I do think that, what Encore did, and Encore does at Convening Leaders as well, is help us create experiences. What they did at IMEX was pretty amazing. But what you look at some of these big events that are happening, the convention center is not the only thing. And to create those immersive experiences, you have to tap into the assets of the city. And so I think that the convention center, while it might be the sort of the hub of the activity, you will see sort of that South by Southwest feel.
Okay. Ken, I mean, Freeman, you do events in all sorts of industries, right? Is that common to the industry, this idea of really going much more experiential, working with the destination, et cetera?
I think it's a fun topic that a lot of people talk about, actually seeing it take place still slow. I would pull back though a little bit because I think that we as an industry, often tend to chase the trend instead of understanding what the underlying change is that's actually happening. So, forgive me, but a while ago, somebody had a DJ at an event, and all of a sudden everybody's got a DJ in the lobby. Nothing wrong with that, but what was the culture that was trying to be created? What was the why behind it? So as we look at festivals, as we look at large consumer events, et cetera, I think we should be challenged to look less at the logistics, the field, the way that they do certain things, and understand what was the community or culture that was coming forward and what was different that attracted people versus the traditional means. And I think we would do ourselves a service to not just chase that specific trend.
Well, it goes back to that immersive experience, though, and people wanting authentic experiences. And I think Seth was saying that I want to be in the green room. Well, being in that green room is great to say that, but is it scalable? Can you afford to do that? And it's going to be interesting how you balance that.
Very interesting. Don't forget, you can ask questions in the app. We'd love to see some questions coming up on screen, so please do that. I want to shift over now to the industry, right? HR, how do we get this industry to really attract the young generation, right? And we had a picture of 20 in their 20s, right? PCMA on stage, recognize them. At IMEX, you have the Future Leaders Forum. So there's a number of initiatives. But is it fair to say that we're still a relatively invisible industry to the young generation? I'll start with you, Sherrif.
So I do believe that in the business events industry, it's largely unknown at the university, college levels, and even high school. I think that hospitality and tourism is known, but PCMA doesn't think of itself as in being in the hospitality and tourism industry. We think we use hospitality and tourism assets, but we're not in that industry. And I don't see in universities, in marketing courses, that face-to-face event is a platform for marketing activation and brand engagement and filling the top of the sales pipeline. And I don't see that being taught right now.
Okay. How do we change that?
So a couple of things. One is that we are engaging faculty a lot more. We've got to start with faculty, but not necessarily faculty that are in the hospitality space. We've got to engage faculty outside, which is a little bit trickier.
It's like engaging the politicians, right? You're kind of having to go into the broader...
You have to. And I mean, we've got to engage with marketing departments of universities. We've got to engage with business schools because that, and not to mention digitization and technology. So those areas we've got to engage with because those are the people that today, I'm sure Carina would agree with this, that we are hiring in our organizations, and that's the talent that we need.
That's
but they don't know about us,
right? I mean, that's a very wide range of people that you need to engage with. Right?
Absolutely, and it's okay to be a big bank and this big bank or a KPMG or PwC that goes to universities. When I was at university, they were trying to recruit me at the undergrad level.
Yep.
Hotel associations are not scaled that way that they can do that. So we're a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to that.
Yeah. Now, Carina, Future Leaders Forum, this idea that you get university students to kind of get into the industry. I know you're doing some research around revamping that.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've been running the Future Leaders Forum for exactly this purpose, to explain to university students what our industry is, what the opportunities are, what the career paths are, and to try to encourage them to make a career in this industry. I've just met an alumni. You're an alumni as well. So that has been successful over 20 years, but we feel we can do more because the industry needs more at the moment. So we're starting by doing some research, where we'll go out to students from sort of 16, 17 years old onwards to actually ask them, like, what do you think this industry is for a start? Where do you get your information? And our idea is to try to build something that we can give to the industry. We're doing this with MPI because they're our partner for the Future Leaders Forum. Because what we'd like to do is that the Future Leaders Forums at the moment take place at a few events around the world, including IMEX events and MPI events, but a few others as well. And we'd really like to create a program that anybody can take, that we can utilize and adapt in the industry and really get to many more students. And interestingly, there's a program in the UK at the moment called the Power of Events, and they are currently doing that. They're doing training programs around the UK to train industry people around how to speak to young people. So things are taking place. We just need to be more coordinated. And I was thinking about this on the plane over here. And as an industry, we are a maturing industry. You know, we're still relatively young if we compare to the automotive industry. And I think we need to have the confidence to go to business schools and to go to marketing schools and to say, this is who we are. We're not hospitality. We create meaningful transformational experiences. We are a key part of a marketer's arsenal. Yep. This is what we do. And I think we need to develop that confidence and also the narrative to be able to do that.
It strikes me that you sort of have to be polyglot in this industry. You have to speak the language of business, you have to speak the language of politicians, you have to speak the language of students. There's a lot of different languages that we have to translate.
But the narrative is similar, actually. You need some different data points, but the narrative is similar. Like, what is the purpose of what we do? The purpose isn't to be sitting here today. The purpose is to exchange ideas, to learn, etc. So I think we need to just get to the heart of why we do what we do.
I think the key is that why, though, particularly for the next generation, the difference between the generations we always say is, if you ask a boomer, I want you to jump, they say, how high? If I ask the next generation, I want you to jump, they look at me and say, why? And that conversation is really at the core of this why. And I think the why of our industry isn't the logistics and the execution, and I know we all know that, but Seth said it so well today. It's about change and transformation. We launch products, cure cancer, change the world through meetings, and that message is where we start, I think, engaging, to Sherrif's point, with the marketing folks and really making that impact of the why.
So I want to stick with you, Ken, just for a quick question. Sustainability, DI, work-life balance, these are all big topics that I think are really important to this next now generation. Are we not walking the walk, so to speak? And are these generations kind of just not that interested because they don't see us walking the walk?
I will say very carefully that we have found that authenticity is at the core. So if an organization is going to step out and say, we are doing X for sustainability, et cetera, we've all seen organizations that do that and then don't walk the walk. I would challenge, particularly associations. We have found that 92% of associations have not asked a DE&I question or a sustainability question of their members as they attend. So if you're going to say DE&I, it's the number one and number two initiative among associations. Why aren't you asking race, age, gender questions, et cetera? I know they're tough to navigate, but they're not even asking them at the meetings in order to be measured. And that's the first red flag of the authenticity of whether or not they're paying attention.
Interesting. I want to jump to an audience question, if you don't mind. I had how do you see event technology evolving to meet the needs of the next generation? You touched on this a little bit. You mentioned it's an enabler, right? Is there something specific that you see the technology evolving to meet the needs?
Well, you know, I mean, we've all heard about AI and talked about AI. 2 years ago, we never spoke about ChatGPT or never even spoke about AI, and here we are. I do believe that, as in terms of transformation, even our work and events, AI will play a critical role. To me, in 2 years, the way Teams opens up or Outlook opens up, it's going to be your AI tool that's going to open up when you turn on your computer. So it's going to transform our work. But what AI is doing is really allowing us to understand the next gen much better, and or helping us understand and helping us cater to that need much better. So I see that event technology is going to be greater integration. Companies that, you know, whether it's Freeman, whether it's Encore, other companies that are in the event tech space is going to play an even greater role with helping us create those experiences.
Right. And we have 1 more minute, so I want to jump into the question that's been upvoted. So thank you for upvoting questions. That helps us a lot. There's a really good question. Tourism, hospitality offers below market compensation when it comes to competing against verticals like tech. How do you attract proper talent without competing on compensation? Anybody want to tackle that?
I'm happy to have a go. We'll never compete with tech. We'll never compete with a law firm, etc. But what Seth's talked about, what you showed as well, is that young people are seeking meaning, they're seeking to make an impact, they're seeking to work for organizations that can be authentic. And we can offer that if we can bridge that gap for them between the work that they'll do in our industry and the impact that that will make. And I think that won't work for everyone. If somebody wants the highest paying job, this might not be the industry for them. But your slide showed that actually career stability and simple finances is not what a large proportion of young people are looking for. And so I think that we've got a real opportunity to show that we can, by working in this industry, you can actually make a massive multiplier effect impact. And I think that's our story.
I can't think of a better place to end this conversation. So Ken, Carina, Sherrif, thank you so much for joining us on stage and tackling this interesting topic.
Thank you.